Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 3 of the anime series, Beautiful Bones, Sakurako's Investigation. And this was just a really beautiful, beautiful episode. It really got me emotional, actually, because I could kind of relate to Tatawaki's friend Kagami's sort of plight in dealing with a grandparent that had sort of dementia, Alzheimer's in the case of one of my grandmothers, and cancer in the case of another. And it just really kind of got to me. It literally kind of made me cry at the end because it was rounded out so beautifully. Of course, you have Sakurako and Tatawaki going on this sort of adventure, this summertime adventure. He is interested in, like, caves and everything, and I guess the stalactites and all that kind of stuff. Just looking at the earth and nature, and much in the way that she does, and is consumed with bones and reconstructing them and understanding them and human anatomy. It seems like he has a penchant for, science and that kind of thing, and they're an interesting pair, definitely. All the while he's trying to kind of build up the courage of, confronting her about being called Sotaru and everything. And we find in this episode that, true to form, it was her little brother. He died. He was probably killed by some means, whether he was, it's something dark and twisted, like he was kidnapped and murdered, or, an accident had befallen him, whatever it was. I was actually pretty surprised after they find this body in the woods. Of course, they have their attentions called to by a woman who just happens to be, passing by. I guess her and her boyfriend were jogging in the woods or whatever, and they stumbled across it. And of course, the cops come and sort of reprimand Sakurako-san for getting involved, and once again going into the zone. We see her getting into that zone of piecing together what probably led to, as we find out, this woman's death. We find out it's, Kagami's grandmother and everything. And but I was actually really surprised at how sort of freely she admits finally to Tatawaki who that boy was. He sees a picture of them both as children in her little sort of office where she's holed up, and she's apparently, perturbed by the treatment she received at the hands of these cops. Back off, lady, that kind of thing. And she's been sort of, I guess her process of sort of, processing those frustrations is rebuilding skeletons of animals and everything like that. She's actually really excited. She's sort of, hopped up about, hey, it's a game trail. Maybe we could find some dead animals. I could harvest the bones and put them together, and, for her own passions, her own curiosities and everything like that. And, of course, finding this body, we didn't know much about it at first, and I was a little confused because once we have sort of this confrontation between Kagami and Tatawaki, and she, like, I don't know if she was treating him to lunch or whatever, but they have some of this cake, and she mentions her grandmother, and when she thanks him and talks about, I was told by the police, you guys found the bones, at first I was like, well, are they talking about that body? I kind of got the gist, maybe it was a man's body, a man's corpse. But then we find out sort of as the episode is unfolding, no, it was her grandmother. And for some reason, because of what this grandmother had to deal with, and I had a grandfather, especially with the grandmother that had the Alzheimer's, the weight to bear, even for my mother, this was her mother, and there were times where my grandfather had to kind of leave our grandmother, who was suffering this dementia, this Alzheimer's disease, with us, and he had to kind of go off on his own for a little while and just, calm himself and be able to deal with it again. You find that friends and neighbors of Kagami's family who knew, like they, I guess, were living somewhere else, and the grandmother would just pass it off as everything is fine, everything is great. And some of these people would then start talking about, well, it must have been too heavy a burden to bear, and she must have stole off in the middle of the night to kill herself, rather than having to face another day dealing with it. And that's something that it was a really heartening fact to be confronted with in a series like this, because those thought processes do affect you when you see someone you love and you care about, especially someone older than you, and they can be sort of brought to the point of almost infantile minded because of the disease eating away at their memory, their brains and everything, their intellect and just the way they function, you know. And to find that here was this man, he was an artist, you know. It's one of those things where there's no lesser or greater value in a person based on whether they enjoy and, you know, perform some kind of art, but it's that much more, you know, sort of expressive that his paintings, they befill the house, because all of that, you know, that was his form of expression. That was maybe in the time before, but maybe even during this transition into this darkness that was consuming him, this dementia, you know, this was his expressive form. He had an eye for detail, as Sakurako was very impressed by this portrait of a horse, the musculature, and he studied these, you know, whether it be sort of an environment that he was painting, whether it be a subject he was painting. He was a true artist. He had this expressive capability, and to have something like that ripped away from you, it's that much more impactful. Somebody who can actually communicate, whether through a verbal medium, whether through words on the page, whether through paintings and portraits and you know, photography and all these things, to captivate and capture at the same time for an audience the beauty of a scene, the beauty of a thing, you know. When you realize that that dementia has stolen that away, has eaten that away, rotten it to its core, it's that much more tragic. And because of all these, you know, surreptitious lies going around, Kagami was just herself. She's at the boiling point. She's at the breaking point. No one can understand. And even she herself, she felt sort of guilty over that fact that she herself didn't understand what maybe her grandmother was going through. And Sakurako, for all of that sort of distancing herself from humanity and sort of being oblivious, you know, like, again, as I've talked about, sort of that Sherlock thing where she's like a high-functioning sociopath. She doesn't understand or even want to deal with social conventions and dealing with people. She just wants to focus on this thing that she, you know, that is all consuming to her, the bones, the understanding of the anatomy and all this kind of stuff, which she apparently takes from her uncle, we find through, you know, the sort of granny woman in the house, the dialogue when Tatawaki's wondering. He's kind of surprised that this goes all the way back to when she was a little girl. But I really felt for Kagami, you know, like Sakurako, she is what gives Kagami this turning point, this realization. For as sort of distanced, as I say, as she is, she was very humanizing in this episode to be able to bring Kagami, being willing to bring Kagami to where they found her grandmother's remains, and to show that it was not suicide, it wasn't giving up on life, it was an accident. And that the real impetus for why she was there was something, the love she had for the works of her husband and the love she had for her husband. She dedicated her every waking moment to him, and she would go on happily if this accident hadn't befallen her. And it just got me emotional. As someone who's been there on multiple facets of all of those sides, this was a hell of an episode. And, yeah. Just a hell of an episode. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of, you know, Beautiful Bones, Sakurako's Investigation, Episode 3, if you've seen it, if you enjoyed it as much as I did, if you were affected as much as I was. And, I mean, it cut to my core. You know, didn't expect that. But yeah, we can agree to disagree. If it didn't work out for you, I love having the conversations, whatever your point of view happens to be. To each their own, and a bag of chips, as I always say. And yeah, so that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well. And I'll catch you all later. Peace.